As you can probably tell from the title, my first game jam didn't go quite to plan. After missing out on the GMTK game jam a few weeks ago, I decided to try the Brackey's game jam 2020.2, as I figured I would have less stress in a week-long event. What I failed to realise was that I would actually only be able to work for around 3 days of that week. Now I know what you're thinking, lots of other jams are only 2 days, so why is that an issue? Well, as you'll see, I kind of forgot that I only had a short space of time while planning out my game. I knew I could make some decent progress on Saturday, as for me the jam started at 11 AM, so I gathered a pen and paper and waited on Discord for the theme reveal. Personally, I thought this was a really cool theme, however I knew that the majority of people will go down the line of a game with a rewind time mechanic. That's not to say that would be a bad game, just that I knew I wasn't great, technically speaking, so I thought I should aim for more of a unique concept. I drew up some ideas pretty quickly and focused on fitting a story around the theme, as that meant I could have more freedom with the actual gameplay. Recently I watched a film called In the Shadow of the Moon, which, although being a bit odd, had an interesting concept with time travel. If you really want to watch this film, then skip to the time shown to avoid any spoilers. Basically, a police officer keeps running into a woman who only kills people every 9 years, even after he accidentally kills her the first time she appears. It turns out that while he is travelling forward through time as normal, she is jumping backwards 9 years at a time, which creates some cool results, such as where she's shot in a later year but has the bullet in her the first time we see her. Originally, I was just going to completely rip off this movie, but I changed the core of it to a bit more of a PG story, where a politician has travelled back in time and replaced himself to alter the course of history in his favour. You then have to talk to the 5 suspects as you jump back 1 year at a time to try and work out who the time traveller is and then ultimately shoot them. Perhaps they slip up and mention an event before it actually happens, and from that you know they're in a different timeline. I knew I also wanted to generate a random timeline each game so that it didn't get repetitive after a few rounds, and I think this is where I slipped up as I underestimated how long this would take to make. I started getting the basic controls up and running on how to navigate between the different politicians in a menu-like style. I really enjoyed experimenting with the tweening library DoTween, and you'll see as we go on that I use it a lot. Like, a lot. I then drew up some art of the 5 different politicians, all from the same base model but putting enough slight proportion changes to give them some unique character. I also added a small idle animation, as otherwise the game screen was going to have hardly any movement and it might look a bit stale. To finish the day off, I started drawing some backgrounds to help show some technological progression to better give the impression of the time travel, which I quickly finished off on Sunday. After that I added some question boxes, plus some little extras like the background shifting to the character's tie colour and an animation when you shoot them. To finish this first stage off, I implemented a few utility functions, such as a game over sequence that resets the level and a counter for your score and time. And now comes time to create the God script, as I call it. This took a few hours of sitting down with a notepad to figure it out, and I'm sure any real programmer or computer scientist will have a much better solution in much less time. But anyway, let's get into it. This needs to be able to generate a random timeline and then make responses for all the characters that follow that timeline, i.e. a character can talk about an event which happened that year or in the past, but they can't talk about something that happened in the future, except of course for the time traveller, who should have one response wrong. To do this, I create 4 separate text or JSON files with all the events, policies, items and thoughts there could be. The God script then takes those files from the assets folder and creates large string arrays for each topic. An integer list is then created with the desired length for the amount of responses needed. In the case of 4 years and 5 characters, this would be 20 responses. This is a random list of indexes. Anyway, that's rather boring, and as this is the first video on this channel, I think I should try to make it as engaging as possible. However, I thought I'd share the biggest mistake to do with getting the right path to the text file. It genuinely took me an hour to spot my mistake. This took up the rest of Sunday and some of Thursday to finally finish and get working, which is obviously a massive chunk of the time I had on one single script. The main part of this was trying to debug the problems myself and figure out ways to work around them. After this, I had to quickly create and implement a main menu with a tutorial to actually explain what is going on, and this is where things went a bit downhill. I started to realise that while this may be a cool concept, it didn't translate well to an actual game. You'll see a lot of people who play games often say things like, oh, wouldn't a game where you can do X, Y and Z be the best game ever? And while X, Y and Z might be fun game mechanics or concepts on their own, it isn't until you actually do some game development that you realise sometimes things just don't work together. For instance, this game kind of fitted into the text-based adventure genre, which is relatively niche. I mean, even in terms of indie games, you don't often hear about one being greatly popular. This means that you need to make sure that your quality is the best possible for any hopes of lots of people liking it. The main aspect, of course, being the text itself. In order to fit my game into the allotted time, the God script I created felt fairly inorganic and very limited when you talk to the characters. There also weren't many different problems I could come up with, and all three were basically a variation of the time traveller says something before that thing happens. Therefore, the puzzle aspect was severely lacking and made it not fun to play. All of that, combined with the fact my file loading didn't work properly when running as HTML, eventually led to me giving up. I don't like to blame outside issues for my failure, but I do genuinely think if I'd been there for the full week, I would have had time to improve the idea, puzzles, and the God script. One positive is that I did actually like the time travel effect I made. Next time I do a game jam, I think I'll firstly pick one where I'm actually there for the whole thing, and secondly I'll focus on creating a minimum viable product before anything else. This is essentially a small prototype with limited features and art just to test whether the core idea of your game is fun to play, which may have saved this one. Anyway, thanks for watching. I won't really beg for a subscription because there's not much to subscribe for really. I also apologise if the mic quality is absolutely terrible. See ya!